Good evening. This is Ann Foradori. I'm on the music faculty of the University of Nebraska at Kearney, and we are here doing our intermission interviews during the intermission for the Kearney Symphony Orchestra concert this evening. And I have some guests to speak to today. I'm sure you'll be glad to hear from them. The first is Dr. Ron Crocker. He's a professor emeritus of music at UNK, and he is formerly the conductor of KSO. And we're going to talk a little bit about a project he's going to start or continue as historian and archivist for the orchestra. So what do you think we'll be looking for in this project?
A few years ago, we started gathering information about the orchestra and trying to reconstruct a history of the orchestra that started in 1905 when the university, when the normal school was in its infancy. Kearney Normal began in 1905, and this being now the 116th year, we would like to gather as much information as we possibly can just to have a complete history of the orchestra.
That's quite an auspicious history, 116 years, and we're sort of unique in Nebraska as a university slash community orchestra, where combined efforts of community musicians and students and faculty gather together. So in looking for information, what kind of things are you looking for?
Well, we would like to gather stories from anyone who perhaps long ago was a member of the orchestra, or audience members that have stories to tell. We'd like to gather as many pictures as we can possibly find. And then I think for the most part we have programs starting back in the mid to late 1980s, but we don't have very many programs at all prior to that time. And we're looking for anyone who has a program available. We would certainly like a copy of it.
It would be really interesting to hear some anecdotal stories about participation in the orchestra at that time. And you have a good story about the first orchestra in 1905, and you want to tell us what that is?
Well, the first orchestra concert that we could track down, and I believe this is probably the very first concert. The orchestra was small. It was called an orchestra, but it was really what I would call a string ensemble of 8 or 10 string members, and they had a concert right around Thanksgiving. It was perhaps the weekend before Thanksgiving, or maybe it was right after Thanksgiving, but the first orchestra concert was actually conducted by the then football coach, and the reason they couldn't do an orchestra concert before that is because he had football season to take care of. And I wish I could remember his name, but it was, I think, a wonderful story. Just the fact that at one time at Kearney Normal, people taught many different things, and I thought it was amusing that the football coach directed the orchestra.
I think it's inspirational.
I agree.
In fact, in one of UNK's lives when we were the Kearney State Teachers College in the 1940s, I saw a historical program that contained the name of my voice teacher's husband. My voice teacher from undergraduate school and her husband were both from Nebraska. And to see Gilbert Stevenson's name in the program was quite fun for me. I think if people want to send you information or how to contact them, anecdotal stories, or if people have maybe access to an old yearbook that had belonged to a parent or a relative, that would be great.
That would. Sources,
in addition to programs, it'd be great to see what the orchestra played over the years. And I think if they want to send that to you at kso@unk.edu, that's our official email for the Kearney Symphony Orchestra, kso@unk.edu, that would be a great start. Anything to add to that?
Anything we can get our hands on as far as stories, pictures, anything, or yearbooks. I hadn't thought about that. And I think that would be very helpful. And then our intention is to gather all the information, write a historical overview of everything, and then perhaps produce it in a little booklet.
That would be great. That would be great. And I think of great interest to our audience as well. Well, thank you for visiting with us today about this, Dr.
Thank you.
Crocker. We look forward to the second half of the concert. I'm back again, and this time I'm speaking to Dr. Duane Bierman, who is the Associate Professor of Music, Director of Bands, and also Director of CAPE, the Kearney Area Percussion Ensemble. Maybe he'll tell us a little bit about that, too. So this year has been unusual with COVID, and we've played concerts with families of instruments, and that has meant that the brass and percussion are paired together. And while that's not an unusual combination of instruments together, in orchestral literature, they usually are not front and center to something besides the strings. And that supposedly, that has to do with the literature, of course. So what has that been like to play literature that's primarily brass and percussion?
Yeah, it's definitely been something different. Although we are doing kind of double duty because we still get to play with strings and woodwinds as well on the pieces like the Tchaikovisky. We have bass drum and cymbal and timpani that are really quite important to the piece. So that has been kind of normal, if I could say that. But yeah, in general, we've been with the brass section and doing brass band-ish arrangements that actually have pretty prominent percussion parts. And that has presented a bit of a challenge to us, but at the same time, it's been really nice to be able to, I don't want to say feel more important, but, for a group of percussionists in an orchestra, we often count a lot of rests.
Yes.
And we still do that.
Yeah.
We don't want to get rusty at that by any means, but when we are playing, it is nice to I guess, be a little bit more important. I can't come up with a better adjective for now.
Well, the fall concert, October concert, featured Carnival of the Animals for the last piece, and certainly the percussion is prominent in that piece.
Right, yeah.
But depending on the literature, sometimes it's supportive, but as you said in the Tchaikovsky, all that middle theme with the Capulets and the Montagues fighting, where would we have sword fighting without the crash cymbals?
Yes, a very important cymbal excerpt, actually. So that's been great to do that important, regular, normal literature, for sure.
And to feel like you're being in the back and supportive of the whole orchestra.
Right.
That's great. Can you tell me a little bit about the Kearney Area Percussion Ensemble and when that began? And I know you've already done your last performance of that group for the year, and how can someone who's an area percussionist maybe get involved with the group?
Sure. All they need to do is contact me, and you can find my information on our website. But it's a group of, I don't want to say ragtag, but I'll go ahead and say ragtag, UNK percussion students and high school students from the area. And it's not out of the realm of possibilities to have just community members as well. It's a little bit of a different ensemble because we only are in existence for about a month at a time in each semester.
Sort of like Brigadoon, you appear
every
once in a while.
Yeah, it's I started it probably 7 years ago now, just because there hadn't been a percussion ensemble here at UNK, and I needed that experience for my students. But we just didn't have enough people to have a big percussion ensemble. So I just started inviting local high school students to come. And we've had students from all over the Tri-City area, big schools, small schools. Sometimes the group is as big as 15 or 18. And then sometimes it's as small as 4, This year with COVID, I didn't invite any outsiders in. We just did everything in-house. But yeah, it's a group that rehearses 3 times and then gives a concert week to week. So we do it all from beginning to end within a span of a month.
And where does your literature come from that? I think there are a lot of people who may associate drum corps with percussion ensemble, but this is really so much more, and there's a vast literature for percussion ensembles too.
Absolutely. Going all the way back, for us, all the way back is about 100 years. But yeah, we'll do some of the classic percussion ensemble, concert percussion ensemble literature when we can. There's a ton of new percussion ensemble literature being written consistently over the last 5-10 years plus. So we're generally doing music that is fairly new. Sometimes it's arrangements, but most, I think, just thinking back, over 90% of our literature is specifically written for percussion ensemble. And the beauty about it is there's so many instruments possible, and I just get to pick music by how many players I have, and then if I want all battery instruments, if I want some mallets, if I want a mixture, if there's something different. We play a lot of new music as well, like open score stuff that it doesn't really matter what it's written for, we can make it work. We've premiered arrangements and compositions by former students of ours. It gives them a chance to get something played, or at least get it read.
Yes.
So I like that opportunity as well to engage with our composition and arrangement students.
And hopefully, when we are back to inviting people to campus more frequently, we can look forward to the group being up and running in the fall.
Yes, absolutely. October will be, I think, when we have it on the schedule. So right away at the end of August, I'll be reaching out to high schools to see if they have anybody interested. Doesn't cost anybody anything. They just got to show up. We'll provide all the equipment. UNK has been very gracious in helping me build up our percussion equipment and instruments over the last few years.
And I think just a reminder that if you're interested in CAPE, in being a member or hearing about what they have in an upcoming concert, if you contact Dr. Bierman through the UNK website, unk.edu/music, his information is there, and they should be able to contact you directly.
That's right.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for talking to us, and we look forward to the Tchaikovsky in the second half of the concert.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm back now speaking with Dr. Anthony Donofrio, who is Associate Professor of Music and also wears many hats. He is heads the music theory studies. He teaches composition, and he's the director of the New Music Ensemble at UNK. And we're here to speak to him about his piece poem that was a commission from the Kearney Symphony Orchestra that will be on the second half of this concert. So where did this commission come from? And let us know what you think the audience should be listening to.
The commission came from simply just talking with Dr. Gaines. She had mentioned that she was interested in collaborating on a piece. She had done a little bit of that in the past, I believe, and the concert time, the concert space was there. So just in the conversation, we tossed around a couple of ideas for instrumentation, for what kind of genre, and settled on what the piece eventually became was just a piece for solo trumpet and strings, and then just winds in pairs. So there's no trombones, there's no horns, there's no tuba. It's basically the woodwind section of the orchestra, the strings, and then a solo trumpet part. The structure of the piece, the way the thing is put together, is similar to a really old, well-known piece from the early 20th century called The Unanswered Question by Charles Ives. Similar in that there's a solo trumpet and strings and winds. But the way I made it was the piece just goes back and forth between solo trumpet statements. So the principal trumpet is Aaron Beeve, who's a good friend, and this was kind of a nice thing because I could write for a friend, and I knew how Aaron plays. I could send Aaron sketches and ideas, and is this too high? Is this will this work? That kind of stuff. And what you'll hear is back and forth solo trumpet statements with a little bit of accompaniment. So the trumpet will have 4 solo parts. The first 3 he has a friend in the orchestra. So the first one is trumpet and vibraphone. The second one is trumpet and oboe, and then the third one is trumpet and flute.
So is that like a call and response?
No.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, it's more. He'll be playing, Well, it's a call and response between trumpet and orchestra very slowly, in a very, very slow fashion. Aaron will be playing his solo line, and then his, there'll be a vibraphone note that will make a new kind of tone color. Same with the oboe, same with the flute. Then when that line is over, they'll go to the full orchestra. Strings will come in, winds will come in, and they'll have a passage. When that's done, we go back to another trumpet one. And it just goes back and forth between that. And the last thing you'll hear is trumpet all by itself. And that's how the piece ends. So the structure of the piece is pretty simple. Trumpet, orchestra, back and forth. The way I made the orchestra parts is I took the previous trumpet line. So what did Aaron just play? And then looked at the notes, looked at the rhythms, and basically made a system, a system to work from that helped me decide what to do for the strings. So a great way to hear this connection is, I believe, it's the end of the second trumpet solo. The last few notes, I think it's the last two notes that Aaron will play will be echoed in the first two notes that the orchestra plays. So it's basically Aaron handing off the line to the orchestra. And then when they get done, they hand it back to Aaron, and he'll do some more stuff, and then it goes back to there. As the orchestral interludes progress, they get more and more intense. So the first one is very calm. It's very peaceful, very quiet. My dynamic writing, I like to write in a lot of fade in, fade out, those kinds of dynamics. By the time we get to the third one, that's when things get really intense. And so what I did was, in that third orchestral interlude, the three folks who were Aaron's friends, so the principal percussion, principal oboe, and principal flute, they kind of become secondary soloists in that third section. Their parts are much harder than the rest of everybody else's parts, while the orchestra is accompanying them. So it's this big mix of commentary on soloistic lines and things like that. So if you're really looking for something to listen to or listen for, I guess that's both. Listen for. It's listen to the trumpet line, and then can you hear a connection from whatever the trumpet just did to what the orchestra is doing? And then back and forth like that. If there's a second thing to listen for, it's the color changes. So when Aaron is doing the trumpet solo, there'll be times when he starts a note really quiet, and crescendos, gets really, really loud, and then he'll just stop, and then you'll hear like this weird little echo sound. And that might be the oboe on the same note, but where he ended super loud, the oboe's starting it super quiet, and those kinds of timbre changes. Basically taking the sound of a trumpet, the sound of an oboe, and creating one instrument like that. So if you're interested in tone color, go for those during the trumpet solos. So.
And I have to ask you where the title came from.
I love poetry. I read a lot of poetry, and the back and forth of it reminded me of the idea of refrain and departure. Maybe some kind of stanza with some kind of line that always returns, and however you want to interpret that, you can say that we'll always return to the trumpet line. We'll always return to that trumpet sound. And then the little program note, which is a clip from a much larger idea, talks about the use of the word silence as a verb, to silence something or to silence somebody. And so there are lots of big screams in the trumpet part. There's big screams in the orchestra part that get cut off abruptly. And so that writing reminded me of that line, and so I thought it was kind of appropriate to toss it in there. Nothing's ever a one-to-one mapping with my stuff. I'm not a programmatic composer, but I do get influenced by a ton of stuff, and so I like to kind of toss that in. As far as a program note goes, I was never a fan of the traditional program note. So if it is slightly ambiguous, that's intentional. That's just kind of my style of program notes.
Well, and I almost asked you about that P word. The last piece on the concert, the Tchaikovisky, is certainly programmatic.
Yeah.
So we look forward to hearing this premiere. It's very exciting. So thank you for speaking today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been great.